I've worked for the Metropolitan Transit Authority for 15 years, mostly on the overnight maintenance crew for the subway system. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and I've always preferred the quiet of the tunnels at night to the chaos of the daytime crowds. At least, I used to prefer it. Now I can't even look at a subway entrance without my heart racing. It started 3 months ago during a routine maintenance check on the D line. My partner, Eddie, had called in sick, so I was working alone. Not strictly according to protocol, but common enough when we're short-staffed. I was inspecting the tunnel walls about half a mile north of the Parkside station when I noticed something odd. There was a section of wall that didn't match the rest. The brickwork was similar but not identical, like it had been repaired at some point. That's not unusual in a system as old as ours, but what caught my attention was a faint draft coming from what appeared to be solid brick. I ran my flashlight along the seam, where the different brickwork met, and noticed traces of what looked like black powder. Not dirt or subway grime, but something finer, almost like graphite. When I touched it, it left a smudge on my fingers that sparkled slightly under my flashlight. Curious, I pressed against different sections of the wall. To my surprise, a portion about 3 feet wide gave slightly under pressure. I pushed harder, and with a grinding sound, the section swung inward like a door. I should have called it in immediately. That's protocol for any structural anomaly. But 15 years of working the same tunnels had made me complacent. And honestly, I was curious. I'd heard rumors about abandoned sections of the subway system, old maintenance tunnels that had been sealed off decades ago. I figured I'd discovered one of those. I shined my flashlight through the opening. Beyond was a narrow passage that looked nothing like our maintenance tunnels. The walls were smooth concrete rather than brick, and the floor had metal tracks embedded in it. Not like subway rails, but smaller, like for a cart system. I stepped through the doorway, intending just to take a quick look. The passage extended about 20 feet before turning sharply to the right. Against my better judgment, I followed it around the corner. The passage continued for another 50 feet before opening into a small chamber. And that's where I saw the first sign that this was something very different from an abandoned maintenance tunnel. The chamber contained what looked like a small control station. A desk with outdated but clearly electronic equipment, a chair bolted to the floor, and most surprisingly, lights that were still functioning, casting a dim blue glow over everything. Who maintains active electronic equipment in a sealed-off tunnel? And why? On the desk was a logbook, its cover worn and faded. I opened it carefully, half expecting the pages to crumble, but they were intact. The entries were dated, the most recent from just 3 days earlier. The content made little sense to me. Strings of numbers and letters, times, and occasional cryptic notes like package delivered or maintenance required at Junction 7. What struck me was that someone was regularly coming down here, using this space, and none of us who worked the tunnels had any idea. I took a few photos with my phone, intending to show my supervisor. That's when I heard it. The sound of metal wheels on tracks, coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber. I quickly turned off my flashlight and ducked behind the desk. Through a gap between the desk and the wall, I watched as a small cart rolled into the chamber, powered by what looked like an electric motor. Riding on it were 2 people in dark clothing with no MTA insignia or identification. They stopped the cart and dismounted, moving with the confidence of people who belonged there. One went to the desk and opened the logbook while the other unloaded several small packages from the cart, stacking them against the wall. "Shipment's light tonight," the one at the desk said. "Quality over quantity," the other replied. "These are priority packages." They spoke casually, clearly not expecting anyone else to be there. I remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as they continued their work. After a few minutes, the one at the desk made some entries in the logbook, then both returned to the cart. "Next pickup is at Junction 12 in 20 minutes, the first one said. "We should move." They got back on the cart and rolled out through another passage, different from the one I had entered through. Once the sound of the cart faded, I waited another few minutes before emerging from my hiding place. My first instinct was to get out immediately, report what I'd seen to my supervisor and possibly the police. But I knew how it would sound. Secret tunnels, mysterious packages, people operating unauthorized vehicles in the subway system. Without evidence, I'd be laughed off or worse, sent for a psychiatric evaluation. I needed proof. I quickly took more photos of the chamber, the equipment, and the logbook. I even snapped pictures of the packages they'd left behind, though I didn't dare open them. Then I noticed a map mounted on the wall behind the desk. It showed what appeared to be an extensive network of tunnels, far more than I knew existed in our subway system. Some connected to stations I recognized, but others led to locations marked only with codes. Several areas were highlighted in different colors, with symbols I didn't understand. I took photos of the map from several angles, making sure to capture all the details. Then, hearing a distant mechanical sound that might have been the cart returning, I hurried back the way I'd come. I made it back to the main tunnel without incident, and carefully closed the hidden door behind me. It blended so perfectly with the surrounding wall that if I hadn't known it was there, I would never have spotted it. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I kept expecting someone to confront me, to somehow know what I'd discovered, but nothing happened. When morning came, I debated whether to tell my supervisor immediately or investigate further on my own. Caution won out. I decided to review the evidence I'd gathered and do some research before potentially making a fool of myself. That night at home, I examined the photos I'd taken. The map was the most interesting. It showed what appeared to be a secondary transit system running parallel to the public subway in some places, diverging in others. Some of the coded locations corresponded to government buildings, others to corporate headquarters, and some I couldn't identify at all. The logbook entries, when I looked at them more carefully, seemed to be tracking shipments. Times, locations, confirmation codes. But shipments of what? By whom? I spent the next week working my regular shifts, paying special attention to the section of tunnel where I'd found the hidden door. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. Subtle security cameras disguised as maintenance fixtures. Unusual patterns in the power usage for that section. Occasional vibrations that didn't match normal subway operations. I also started researching the history of the subway system, looking for any mention of secondary tunnels or private transportation networks. I found references to old pneumatic mail delivery systems, Cold War-era government contingency plans, and rumors of private tunnels built by wealthy corporations to connect their buildings. Nothing definitive, but enough to suggest that what I'd seen might be part of something larger and older than I'd initially thought. During my next overnight shift, I returned to the hidden door. This time I came prepared. I'd brought a small camera that could be clipped to my uniform, extra batteries for my flashlight, and a small pry bar in case I needed to force my way through any additional doors. The hidden entrance opened as before. I made my way back to the control chamber, relieved to find it empty. This time I examined everything more thoroughly. The electronic equipment was sophisticated but dated, probably from the early 2000s. The power supply appeared to connect to the main subway grid, but had its own backup system. Most interestingly, I found a schedule tucked inside the logbook. It showed regular deliveries and pickups at various junctions throughout the night, with different colored codes that seemed to indicate priority or content type. According to the schedule, no deliveries were expected for the next hour. I decided to explore further, following the passage where the cart had disappeared. This tunnel was longer and sloped gradually downward. After about a quarter mile, it split into 3 branches. I chose the middle one, which the map had shown connecting to something labeled Hub 3. The tunnel eventually opened into a much larger chamber, easily the size of a small warehouse, and it was active. Overhead lights illuminated a space filled with shelving units, packaging stations, and what appeared to be a sophisticated sorting system. Several of the small carts were parked along one wall, charging at power stations. Most alarming of all, there were people working there, about a dozen, all dressed in the same dark clothing as the 2 I'd seen earlier. They moved with purpose, processing packages, checking computer terminals, and loading carts. I ducked behind some crates near the entrance, my heart pounding. This was no abandoned tunnel or forgotten maintenance area. This was a fully operational underground logistics center that had somehow remained hidden from official oversight. As I watched, a cart arrived through another tunnel entrance, carrying more packages. The workers unloaded it efficiently, scanning each package with handheld devices before sorting them onto different shelves. I needed to document this. I carefully positioned my clip-on camera to record the scene while remaining hidden. After about 20 minutes of observation, I had seen enough to confirm that this was some kind of distribution network operating literally beneath the city's feet. I was preparing to leave when I heard a voice directly behind me. MTA maintenance crew doesn't come down this far. I turned to find a tall woman in the same dark uniform as the others, but with a red stripe on the shoulder that seemed to indicate authority. She wasn't holding a weapon, but her stance suggested she was prepared for trouble. "I got lost," I said lamely, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. "No, you didn't," she replied calmly. "You found the door in section D7, and you made a choice to go through it. Now you've made another choice to come here. The question is, what are we going to do about that?" My mouth went dry. "I won't tell anyone," I said, immediately regretting the words. They made me sound guilty, and they both knew I was lying. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "Come with me." She led me through the chamber to a small office at the back. Inside was an older man in a business suit, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up as we entered, his expression shifting from annoyance to interest when he saw my MTA uniform. "Found him behind the storage crates," the woman reported. "He came in through D7. The man nodded. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll handle this." After she left, he gestured for me to sit. "I'm Mr. Phillips," he said, "and you've stumbled into something complicated." "What is this place?" I asked, figuring directness was my best option now. "A private transportation and logistics network," he replied simply. "It's been in operation for over 70 years, running parallel to but separate from the public transit system." "That's not possible," I said. "The MTA controls all the tunnels. Something this size would be on the maps, would require maintenance, power." "The MTA controls the tunnels it knows about," Phillips corrected. "This network was built primarily by private interests, financial institutions, technology companies, certain government agencies, who needed secure, efficient transportation of sensitive materials without the risks and visibility of surface routes." "So what are you moving down here?" "It can't be legal." Phillips actually chuckled at that. "Nothing illegal, I assure you. Primarily secure documents, sensitive electronic components, occasionally personnel who need to move between locations discreetly. Everything that passes through our network is fully documented and accounted for." "Then why the secrecy? Why not just operate openly?" "Security, primarily. The moment a system like this becomes public knowledge, it becomes a target. For criminals, for terrorists, for competitors. Secrecy is our best defense." I wasn't buying it. "If this is all legitimate, why not just tell the MTA? Work together officially." "Bureaucracy," he said with a shrug. "The more people who know about a secret, the less secret it becomes. We have arrangements with certain individuals in city government and the transit authority. People at levels far above your supervisor or even their supervisors. We operate with tacit approval, provided we maintain our own infrastructure and don't interfere with public transit operations." It sounded plausible, but something still felt off. If this was all above board, why did it feel so clandestine? And why was I being given this explanation instead of simply being removed or reported? "So what happens now?" I asked. Phillips leaned forward. "That depends on you. You've seen something few people outside our organization are aware of. We'd prefer to keep it that way." "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all. I'm offering you an opportunity. We're always looking for people who understand the subway system, who can work discreetly. Your discovery of our entrance shows initiative and observational skills we value." I stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "A consulting position to start. You'd keep your MTA job, but occasionally assist us with maintenance issues where our network interfaces with the public system. You'd be well compensated for your discretion and expertise." It sounded too easy. "And if I decline?" Phillips spread his hands. "Then you leave, return to your job, and we trust in your professional discretion. Though I should mention that any evidence you've gathered would be difficult to verify. These tunnels don't appear on any public maps, and our entrances are designed to be virtually undetectable when closed." The implication was clear. Try to expose them, and I'd look like a conspiracy theorist with no proof. I needed time to think. "Can I consider your offer?" "Of course," Phillips said, sliding a business card across the desk. It contained only a phone number, no name or company. "Call this number when you've decided, but please decide within the week." Sarah escorted me back to the hidden door where I'd entered. Before leaving, she gave me a warning that sounded more like friendly advice. "Whatever you decide, don't try to investigate further on your own. Some areas of our network have security measures that don't distinguish between intruders and lost maintenance workers." I returned to my regular duties, my mind racing. Over the next few days, I discreetly asked colleagues about rumors of hidden tunnels or private subway systems. Most laughed it off as urban legends, though a few of the older workers mentioned vague stories they'd heard over the years. Maintenance crews finding strange doors that weren't there the next day, unusual power drains that couldn't be explained, sounds of machinery from behind solid walls. I also tried researching Phillips and the network he described. I found nothing concrete, but there were academic papers discussing theoretical private infrastructure networks in major cities and historical records of businesses constructing private tunnels between buildings in the early 20th century. It wasn't implausible that such a network could exist and remain largely unknown. The clincher came when I was reviewing city utility maps and noticed discrepancies between different versions. Areas that appeared as solid bedrock in public records, but showed mysterious gaps in older archived maps. The gaps corresponded roughly to areas where I'd seen tunnels on the network map. After a week of consideration, I called the number Phillips had given me. A woman's voice, not Sarah's, answered and instructed me to go to a specific subway maintenance room during my next shift. There, I found a package containing a specialized keycard, a confidentiality agreement, and instructions for accessing secure areas of the network. I had decided to accept their offer, at least temporarily, partly out of curiosity, partly for the promised compensation, but mostly because I wanted to learn more about what was really happening beneath the city. For the next 2 months, I led a double life. During my regular MTA shifts, I performed my usual maintenance duties, but once or twice a week, I would use my keycard to access the private network and assist with various technical issues. Power integration problems, ventilation systems that interfaced with the main subway, structural reinforcements where the two systems ran close to each other. I learned that the network was indeed primarily used for secure transportation of sensitive materials. Financial institutions moved documents and data storage devices between buildings without the risks of surface courier services. Tech companies transported prototype components and confidential hardware. Government agencies moved classified materials between secure locations. But I also discovered darker aspects of the operation. Some of the personnel transport Phillips had mentioned involved moving people who didn't want to be seen entering or leaving certain buildings. Politicians meeting with corporate donors, executives conducting industrial espionage, individuals who appeared to be foreign agents meeting with handlers. And some areas of the network remained off limits to me, despite my new access privileges. Tunnels marked with red symbols on the maps were strictly forbidden, with security checkpoints that my keycard couldn't pass. My suspicions grew when I overheard conversations about special deliveries that didn't match the regular schedule and references to clients who weren't on the official roster Phillips had shown me. I began keeping my own log of observations, storing it on an encrypted drive rather than my phone or computer. I noted patterns in the special deliveries, unusual security protocols around certain packages, and the names of individuals I observed using the network who seemed out of place. 3 weeks ago, I was working on a ventilation issue near one of the red-marked tunnels when I heard a commotion from beyond the security checkpoint. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy being dragged. Curiosity got the better of me. I positioned myself near an air duct that connected to the restricted area and listened. What I heard chilled me to the bone. 2 men were discussing the disposal of someone who had asked too many questions. They mentioned a processing facility at the lowest level of the network where problems could be permanently resolved. I couldn't hear everything clearly, but the implications were unmistakable. This wasn't just about moving sensitive documents or prototypes. Some part of this network was being used for something much more sinister. I retreated quickly, finished my assigned task, and left, trying to act normal despite my racing heart. That night, I reviewed everything I'd learned about the network, looking for patterns I might have missed. The restricted areas seemed to connect primarily to government buildings and certain corporate headquarters with defense contracts. The special deliveries often coincided with international incidents or major policy announcements. And the personnel being transported discreetly included individuals whose faces I recognized from news reports on intelligence agencies and black ops contractors. I was sitting on evidence of what appeared to be a shadow transportation system used by the most powerful entities in the country for operations they wanted to keep hidden from public view, potentially including the elimination of people who threatened their secrecy. The next day, I called in sick to my MTA job. I needed time to think, to decide what to do with this information. Going public seemed dangerous. If they really were disposing of threats, I'd be putting myself directly in their crosshairs. Going to the authorities wasn't much better. How would I know which officials were already aware of and complicit in the network's operations? As I was contemplating my options, I received a text message from an unknown number. Your access has been suspended pending review. Report to Hub 3 at 2200 hours for consultation. They knew I had called in sick. They were monitoring me. I didn't respond to the message, and I didn't go to the meeting. Instead, I packed a bag with essentials, withdrew cash from my bank account, and went to stay with a friend in another city, claiming I needed a break from work stress. For my temporary refuge, I began organizing the evidence I'd gathered. I created encrypted files with maps, photos, logs of my observations, and detailed descriptions of everything I'd seen and heard. I set up dead man switches that would release the information to journalists and online platforms if I didn't check in regularly. Then I received another message. Your concerns are noted. We would like to address them. Final opportunity for discussion. Tomorrow, 1500, Central Park, Bethesda Fountain. A public place, daytime. It seemed safer than meeting in the tunnels, but still risky. I decided to go, but with precautions. I told my friend where I was going and with whom, set my dead man's switch to a shorter interval, and carried a concealed audio recorder. I arrived early and positioned myself where I could see all approaches to the meeting point. At exactly 3 p.m., Phillips appeared, alone and apparently unarmed. He sat on a bench near the fountain and waited. I approached cautiously, staying aware of my surroundings and potential threats. Phillips smiled when he saw me, gesturing for me to join him on the bench. You've been avoiding us, he said without preamble. I heard something concerning, I replied, about disposal and a processing facility. Phillips sighed. I was afraid of this. You've misunderstood something and jumped to conclusions. Explain it then. The processing facility handles sensitive document destruction, classified materials that can't go through normal shredding procedures. Disposal refers to removing compromised electronic equipment from service. And yes, occasionally we have to deal with individuals who breach security protocols, But that means termination of employment and access privileges, not whatever you're imagining. It sounded plausible, but convenient. Why all the secrecy then? Why the restricted areas? Some of our clients require extraordinary security measures. The less any individual knows about the entire operation, the more secure the network remains. He leaned forward. You're a valuable asset. Your technical skills and knowledge of the main transit system have already improved our operations. Don't throw away this opportunity because of a misheard conversation. I wasn't convinced. I need more access. I need to see these restricted areas for myself. Phillips shook his head. That's not possible. Those areas require security clearances we can't provide to consultants. Then I can't continue working with you, I said. I won't be part of something I don't fully understand. Consider carefully, Phillips warned. The compensation we offer is substantial. The alternatives, less appealing. The threat was subtle, but clear. I stood up. I'll take my chances. I walked away, half expecting to be stopped or followed, but nothing happened. I returned to my friend's apartment, packed my things, and moved to a hotel under a different name, paid in cash. That night, I uploaded all my evidence to secure servers with instructions for release if anything happened to me. I sent encrypted copies to journalists I researched carefully, people with reputations for integrity and courage in facing powerful interests. 2 days later, the first story broke. Shadow transit system operating beneath major city. It didn't name me as the source, but it included some of my photos and descriptions. Other outlets picked it up, adding their own investigations and sources. The official response was swift and predictable. Denials from city officials, claims that the tunnels were simply abandoned projects or emergency systems, suggestions that the photos were hoaxed or misrepresented. But then came the pushback. Former employees of the network began coming forward, confirming its existence and operations. Historical researchers found documentation of its construction dating back to the 1950s. Satellite imaging experts identified unexplained power usage and thermal signatures consistent with the network's mapped locations. The full truth is still emerging, and likely will be for years. Some aspects of the network were indeed legitimate. Secure transportation for sensitive materials, and occasionally personnel. But other parts appear to have been co-opted for less transparent purposes, including potentially illegal surveillance, extraordinary rendition of suspects, and yes, possibly the elimination of threats to powerful interests. I'm still in hiding, moving frequently, using only cash, avoiding cameras and social media. I don't know if Phillips and his organization are looking for me, but I'm not taking chances. The journalists I worked with have advised me to stay off the grid until the full investigation plays out and legal protections can be arranged. Sometimes at night, I still hear the faint rumble of trains beneath the city and wonder what else is moving down there, in the darkness below our feet. What other secrets are hiding in plain sight in the infrastructure we take for granted every day? If you live in a major city with an old subway system, pay attention to the walls next time you're on a platform. Look for sections that don't quite match, doors that might not lead where they're supposed to, maintenance areas with unusual security. The network I discovered may not be the only one of its kind. The world beneath our feet is vaster and more complex than most of us realize. And some of its passages lead to places we were never meant to find.